everyone. Good afternoon from me, and I'm sure it's good evening and good morning from some others. It's wonderful to have Sean Marx with us today. Firstly, Sean put in a presentation, but he's also one of our sponsors as well through iLight. And he'll tell you more about what he does and the product itself. But it's fantastic to have you, Sean. Sean, is this your first iMoot you've presented at?
Yes, it's my first.
So yes, that's not obvious. It'll all be good. And it's just fantastic to have somebody new on board, and we really hope you enjoy this. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and thanks to everyone for joining. Appreciate it, and I hope that the presentation is at least of some value to you guys. As Wendy mentioned, that I would like to talk to you about the Atto editor and just a little bit about how we could maximize the Atto editor and just make the content that we do create in the Atto editor just that little bit richer than the plain old vanilla. So let's get cracking. As mentioned, I'm the co-owner of iLight, which is a small e-learning company based out of Cape Town in South Africa. And we have two core focus areas, the one being obviously Moodle customization and hosting. And then we also do a bit of storyline development for a few select clients. And yeah, my focus is primarily on the Moodle side of things. I'm a coder, so the presentation is probably not going to be as polished as some of the other presenters. And what I would like to really focus on is the coding side of the Atto editor as opposed to the learning design side. I'm not too concerned about good learning practice. I'm really more concerned about how we could take the content that you're adding to Atto and make it just a little bit better. And as a coder, that's kind of where my passion lies. So we've all seen this in Moodle, and it's just stock standard, good old-fashioned plain content, and it's not very exciting, and it's not really going to inspire anybody to do it. And in the past, I've been guilty of doing exactly the same, just dropping content into Moodle and building a course, and yeah, that doesn't really look too good. What we really want is we want content that looks like this. And this is content that has obviously been built in something like Storyline. It's rich. There's click events that users can interact with. And when you look at this, you kind of want to click the next button and you want to go to the next screen. That's what we want to do. And that's really what we would like to try and achieve in the Atto editor. But given the Atto editor as it is at the moment, that would be rather tricky. So what could we do? We could try to move towards that by building some components like what we have over here on the side, which is an accordion. And that just, well, firstly, it shortens the length of the page so we don't have scroll of death. And it allows the user to interact with the content by clicking on each accordion header and just slowly scrolling through the content. That's really what we would like to do, is just kind of take that half step towards the richness of a third-party authoring tool. So typically that content could look like this. We have a nice layout, we have our accordion on the left-hand side, and we have the image on the right, and the user could click through the accordion and view the content. And because we're using a grid layout, we also know that this is going to be responsive, which is awesome for going to smaller screens on our mobile devices. So that's just perfect. But if we had to build this, it would look like that. And that's a lot of code. I mean, even for a coder, that's a lot of code. I wouldn't want to write that. And just recently in a training session, I tried to teach the guys just some coding, some basics, things like using divs and p tags to create paragraphs within their content, and then to style it, and they were finding it challenging. So to write this kind of code where we're creating accordions and we creating responsive images, that's just not going to happen. And that's really where Hubble came from. So Hubble is an acronym for helping you build better learning, and it started about 3 years ago. And 3 years ago when I started Hubble, It was called ACT, in fact, Adaptive Content Tool. But the guys from City and Guilds Kineo in the UK have an Adapt tool, which allows you to create responsive content, package it as SCORM, and it's pretty good. But it's a third-party tool, and it sits outside of Moodle. And what I really wanted was I wanted to put that content and that authoring capability inside Moodle. And that's really where I was tinkering, was how can we move that into Moodle and allow you to create that kind of content. And obviously it went through a number of changes and updates. And you can see from version 2.7, where I first deployed it into Atto, to version 3.1, how the menu has changed, and the menu being all the colored Atto components, and the change that we have, different style. And really what happened there was I tried to create too many components. I tried to overdo it. So the components were largely static. You clicked and the component was added to the screen. You could change the text, or you'd have to switch to the edit mode and make a change to the component there, which again puts us back in the edit mode. And to be honest, that was pretty sad, because I wasn't really moving forward with what I was hoping to do, and that was to give you an easy way to create really good content. So, as I mentioned, with a number of iterations, we arrive in Moodle 3.1, and there are fewer components, and I try to group them logically. And I try to think about how would you use them. So you would start by creating a layout, and the layout is really that grid that you put on the screen, and then you select a container and drop that into the layout, and then add content to the container. So it's kind of like building on layers. And you could obviously go with a layout and add an interactive component like an accordion or tabs or even a flip card, to create that level of interactivity and have the student connect with the content. So what does that look like? Well, firstly, with the new version, I wanted it to be easy so that you could quite easily delete a grid if you created a grid, or if you added a component to a grid point, you could click on the drag label and drag the component around the screen and place it. So if you decided, oh, hang on, the label needs to be on the left-hand side as opposed to the right, just move it to the new container. When you click the drag, it highlights, and I'll be showing this a bit later. The other thing I did was reduce the number of components, but by reducing the number of components, I added functionality. So essentially, you could, instead of having 4 different colored boxes, have a single colored box, but have the ability to edit this box, change whether we want shading, change the color of the box, even add your own color, and add the content straight into the box without having to edit and then add the content later. And once you've added your content and done the settings in terms of the border, the background color, your font color, your line style, you would get something that looks like this. It's literally paste your text, click create box, and it's done. The work is there. And then once you've added the box to the screen, sometimes you have the need to change the color because you find, well, there's too many red boxes, and actually would like to just break it a bit. And adding the ability to click the edit button and just make the change on the fly, well, I added that in. So if we were to look at saying, well, how would we add a component to the screen? It would be quite simple. We'd select our colored box from the menu. We'd get a pop-up. We'd put our content into the content box, and we would click create box, and the box is added to the screen. It's really like as simple as that. Just select your component that you wish to use, populate it, and apply it. So what we need to do now is actually just go into a bit of a screen sharing session and have a look at how this actually looks practically. What we need to do is share screen. And I was watching Scott this morning, and he's a seasoned presenter, and even he thought, Jonas, this could be a little bit tricky. Let's see, cancel full screen. Let's just try that again. We seem to have a little bit of a... Okay. sorry, a little bit of nerves and rookie mistakes. So let's just see, screen sharing is starting. And there we go, screen sharing. So hopefully what you have in front of you now is my screen, and you see a nice picture of Cape Town. If you guys can't see it, please just give me a shout out and I'll make sure that it is coming up. All good? Magic. Thanks, Dot. Right, so let's just have a look at what I have done with the components and how it looks. For one, I've added a ribbon to the screen and a little bit of information underneath the ribbon. We have a label component and an image placed next to it. And then we have the accordion, which is the pic you guys saw earlier, and the image next to it. And then we have some tabs with the content placed in the tabs. But what we also have is the ability to add some animation, and we can sequence the animation, so we can have a start time and a delay, which really sets at which point that animation will play. We can also add some flip cards, which would allow us to just add some content to the screen and get the user to, and this could even be in the form of a question and answer, where we could have a question on the front screen, for example, who was Nelson Mandela, and we could pop it over and we could read some details. Likewise, we could have, in this case I've only created two, but we could have a true, false, yes, no type question, and we could have a multiple choice type question, where we could ask a question, submit, and we just get a pop-up. So, and I know the thought as well, if you could see it like this, then quite possibly people could just bring up the editor and they could then go and look at the code and see what the answer looks like. Not quite. And I'll just quickly show you behind the curtain. So what I've done here is I've just created a little bit of encoding which hides the answer. So you can see that we've just applied a little bit of 64-bit encoding, and when you've clicked submit, the answer gets passed back. It gets decrypted and compared to what the correct answer was when you set it, and in that way you can create a question and still create a sense of having to achieve something by getting the answer right, rather than pressing F12 to go and look at the code in the background. And that's all pretty good. But what you'd really like to see is how to use it, I guess. So let's just switch over to a blank screen and click and go into the edit topic. So firstly, we have our components, and we can see that this is a layout component. And when building the content, we really want to structure it in a way that we could add the layout to the screen, then apply the components, and then add our content. So if I had to bring up my storyboard, which was set for this, we could see that my storyboard tells me that it's going to be about beaches. I'm going to use a span 8.4. I'm going to use tabs, and that we will have the 4 components or the 4 items added to it. Something simpler may be in the sense that we would use a span 6, where we would have some content and an image. So if we were looking at doing something like that, it would be quite easy for us to pick and say we'd like to add a span 6. If we added a span 4 and realized, oh, hang on, these span 4's in the wrong place. And to understand how these spans work, maybe I should really start there by saying that think of your screen as being divided into 12 columns, each column being one span, which is taken from the Bootstrap 3 concept of 12 columns. So if we were talking about a span 6, it would be 2 columns of 6 totaling 12. Likewise, if we were to add a span 3, that would give us 4 by 3. And the reason it's its wrapping is just because of the screen size and it not being responsive on the small screen. But if you had to display it, it would be quite all right. So looking at adding some content, we can select the content. I could write something in over here first and select it. And then select that I would like to add it to an alert, and you can see the content is being pulled through. We could set our border radius, pick a color, and create the component. Let's just drop another span 6 over here. If I were to drag this component now, by clicking, immediately it highlights the possible drag areas, and I could drag it and drop it over here, or move it up there. And there's always this heartbreaking moment where you think, oh, it's not going to work today. And there we go. If we wanted to edit that, we could come in here and change the text. We could look at changing the layout by making the box a little bit smaller and saying update, and you can see it's gone narrow, but it's also changed that. So let's just fix that quickly. So we come to style. What should my border color be? Let's just pick blue over here. The background color blue, but just soften it slightly. Let's give it a nice radius and a little bit of a thickness. Text. My text is going to be black. Let's make it white. And bold. Update. There we go. And you may have noticed that while I was actually doing the changes, you could see that in real time I was getting feedback, so I could see what was going to appear on my screen. So that's pretty cool as well. If we were to animate this, we could select the animate option. We could then scroll through and say, bouncing, what did that look like? And boom, we can have a look and see, that's what bouncing looks like. Obviously, we'd like to do a flipper. So, whoops, let's just select flip, and we could not see what it looks like. I picked the wrong one. What about sliding up? There we go. So we'll use that. We'd like a 1 second delay or duration, and let's make a 1 second delay and update that. Let's just remove this. And now we can look at what's happened to that code. We can see that there's going to be an animation. The type of animation is it's going to be a slide up. There's a 1 second duration and a 1 second delay prior to that animation happening. And you can see all the code that's been written. So that makes it really easy for us to get something done. So let's just save and see what this looks like. Okay, and there we go, a nice little slide. Scroll out of view, come back, and the slide happens again. So what's really happening there is that we have a viewport, and the viewport is that visible viewing area on your screen. If you scroll out of view and come back, the animation will replay. So that's just very quickly looking at the alert and just using a box and a grid. So let's just remove this and just clean up some of that line breaks. Let's add a span 12. Oops, make a spelling mistake. There we go. Cape Town. And let's look at something like that. Edit, center it. We could say, well, let's make it look just a little bit better than that. How about some realistic 3D? Let's make it a bit bigger. And capitalize. And you can see it's already capitalized. So let's just uppercase it. You can see that we're getting some feedback and we can see what it's going to look like. And if we do an update, there we go. Probably would have looked better on a nice background. So let's do that. Let's create a nice background for this because that's probably not going to look that good. Let's just remove that. Let's go back. We've done that. So let's get a nice box. And as mentioned, we can set a nice border color. We can set the shading if we want to change the shading, the vertical, horizontal length, the blur radius. Let's make the blur radius a little bit bigger. So, okay, that's perfect. And now let's look at applying that style to it. Let's take neon should be fine. Oh. Nope, let's not use neon, let's use fire. Update, perfect. And there we go. So we could have done that. Let's look at some of the interactive components maybe and just have a look at how easy it is for us to add some interactivity to the screen. I'm going to use two spans over here. And the first one is maybe to just grab an accordion and just have two. I kind of like blue, so we'll take blue. Oopsie, I should have picked two. And okay, I've picked three, but there you can see we can add the accordion to the screen. And likewise, if we were to add some tabs to the screen, we could do that by also selecting the number of tabs. We'd like the border to be a dark blue and the tabs to be a little bit of cyan. Click. And there we go. We have some tabs. So that's pretty cool. Okay. What could we do? Let's just cancel out of here. So that's all good and well. And I could go on and play with this and be in my own zone and completely forget that I'm actually doing a presentation. I'm just going to quickly open up the presentation again and fetch it from my other monitor. Let's just do this. So, okay, I'm just going to stop screen sharing for a minute and just go back to where we were. This is going to work. If you were looking to use the Hubble components, you could just go to the site, hubble.info, register, and when you register, it's good old-fashioned Moodle registration, and it will create a course for you, and automatically add you into that course as a teacher, so that you can go and create an experiment and do what you want to. And when you're done, zip it up and move it onto your site. And there are some instructions on how to do this if you want to add Hubble to your own Moodle site. I use the Elegance theme pretty much everywhere because I really like it, and it works very well. And it's a Bootstrap 3 theme, so that kind of works for me. And just some links on how you could go about getting familiar with the Hubble components and how to deploy it to your site. But yeah, suppose you don't want to use Hubble. Suppose you actually want to just do some of this editing on your own, in your own site. Well, that's possible too. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to just show you guys a little bit of simple coding that you can apply to the Atto editor and to that standard editor and get some really good results from it. So let's once more tempt fates and do some screen sharing. And we should be up in a sec. There we go. The screen should be loading shortly. Yes, we are back. Good. So when it comes to stock standard Atto and just editing content, what I like to do first when I load up a Moodle site is I like to go and install the HTML Plus from Andrew Nichols. And I know it's not available in Moodle 3.1, but it actually does work. You just can't deploy it through the normal means of installing a plugin, but you can drop it into the lib editor Atto plugins folder and run notifications, and it'll deploy just fine. And so pretty much for me, that's the first thing I do. So let's just quickly hop across and look at what that does. So what HTML Plus does, and remember, you need to also add this to the Atto editor menu. You can't just drop it in. You also have to update the editor. And because we not really talking about that. I'll just move along. But what that does is it gives me code highlighting, which even as a developer is what I want to see. Normally in your editor, it's gray, but with HTML Plus, we get some color, which is brilliant for writing code and seeing where there's bugs. Okay, let's just quickly go to some prepared content like the 3 images I have on the screen. So we have these images and we've dropped these images onto the Atto editor. But what we can do is we can do a little bit of customization, and it's really simple, and it could start moving the content forward without having to go to Hubble and register and use the components and back up and come back here. Of course, I'd like you to do it, but you don't need to. The most important thing that we would want to do is either add or find the class over here. And we know that if we do this, we get a responsive image. So what does that mean? It means that the image would scale to the size of the screen as opposed to having a fixed size and possibly pushing out a scroll bar, which is not really what we want. If we had to view that in the GUI side, we wouldn't really see anything, but it would be a responsive image. What we could do is look at image dash rounded, for example, and that would give me some nice round corners, and that's pretty cool. Or we could apply image dash thumbnail, which is what I did on my flip cards. And that gives us this nice little thumbnail, and if you can just see it, there's these little corners, which is perfect. But we could do more than that. If we brought up the editor, and as I mentioned, I use Chrome, and we selected the image, we could do a few things right here in the editor. We could, for example, say border radius, and I'm going to make it extreme because if it's extreme, you can clearly see the effects, and there we go. We could do that. We could give it a nice border radius. We could also give it a shadow if we wanted to. So we could say box dash shadow, and you'll see there's some smart prompting, which is really cool. And if we were to give it a shadow, it really works in the case of our horizontal offset, our vertical offset, our blur radius, and the color of the shadow. By default, it's going to be black, but we could have said make it blue, and there we are. I'm using blue again. Or we could have gone and said, let's pick a color, some sand dune. There we go. And using the browser editor, we could create that effect. So what's happening here to this image is the code is actually being applied to our inline style. So without needing to add in third-party plugins, we can already start styling and get some really cool effects going up. Some of the other things that we may want to do is, let's just add another box over here, is we could add a div, and we could say style. We could leave it blank. Add some text. And let's just fix, you can see that the div is broken, and when I fix it, the div goes green, and that's exactly what we wanted to see. And that's a lovely little bit of addition that we get. And there's my text. What would work well for us over here is if we could see the border. And I don't want to do too much of this, but just from having taught a few guys just recently and realizing that things like this are a bit lacking as well. Oops, made a small mistake. Let's switch that off. Let's just go and select that text. There's no styling. One pix, solid, hash, and 000 is black. But if we don't know black, we could just write the color that we wanted. And in this case, we could use Rebecca purple. And we could get purple. So let's quickly just talk about two other things. One is setting the width, and we would like the width to be 400 pixels, and centering that component, which is margin 0 auto. So what does that do for me? The 0 tells me the margin from the top and the margin from the bottom, and auto tells me the left-right placement. We could have done this. And that tells me top, right, bottom, left. Never do this, because 0 is 0. We don't need to say 0 picks. But by doing this, we can get a nice center. And it only works if there's a width, so remember that. The other thing that we want to do is add some padding. And that's that. So the important thing is margin moves the component away from the edge of the screen, and padding positions the content inside the border. So it would be margin, border, padding, content. And let's just, for the heck of it, say text align colon center, and note the smart prompting. So if you kind of have like a rough idea of the type of thing you want to do, your browser's editor is going to help you. If we had to say, well, we'd like to make it all uppercase, so that'll be a text transform. And that would allow us to do a text transform. Oops, and Pukunui has just sent me some messages. Okay, so I could go on and on just because I'm a coder and this is where my passion lies, but I'm going to stop right there and stop the screen sharing and wrap this presentation up. So, as I mentioned, we can do some editing using our browser, and something that's not in Chrome, unfortunately, because Chrome is my tool of choice. But if you were to use, for example, something like Firefox, you could even replay animations and test the animation within Firefox, which is really cool. You can drag and stop it, and you can see exactly what that animation effect is. So, so that's really nice. And important, when you've done the styling, you can switch to the code view. You can go and look, and again, I'm using HTML plus over here, the code highlighted. It's very easy for me to quickly go and look and make a change the border from 1 pixel solid to 2 pixels dashed, whatever the case might be. And we can start doing things. So the last thing I want to mention is just the fact that we can also use a little bit of styling in our courses. So when would this happen? This would happen where we've created a course, and this course would be self-paced, and we would like to apply one style to it. But what if we wanted to create a second course, which was, say, facilitator-led, and we wanted to style it slightly different, different icons, a different skin maybe, but we don't want to use themes and apply the theme to the course. And there's actually a simpler way around this. And that simpler way is to use a little bit of JavaScript. It doesn't look so little, but it's obviously all copy paste, so that's pretty good. And we apply a style using that JavaScript, and we inject the style into topic 0 of the course. So if we were to look at the course, let's just save out of here and close this. We could take that code and drop it in here. And that would allow us to write just a little bit of custom CSS for this particular course. And all that we would be doing is changing the section name, the titles, just for this one course. And that's really cool, because that allows us to very quickly, without having to create the whole theme, skin just that one course. And that's it. I realized I was actually telling you guys about topic 0 and I wasn't screen sharing, so sorry about that. Just the very, very last thing before I open it up to questions and allow you guys to go off and have some coffee, is for a client of mine, they had a storyboard that was done by the instructional designer using custom icons, and the content was pretty much repeated. It was in week format, so over 5 weeks they would be doing an intro video, there'd be a learning session, there'd be a discussion forum, and this kind of repeats over and over in a 5-week period. So what I did for them was I actually went and created a custom Atto editor with the icons. So when it came to creating the content, they would click on the video icon it would pop up, they would paste the content in, they would click save, and the icon and the content was added to the screen, and it would look like this. So instead of having to manually go and code and drag the image in and save it, there's a simpler way around it. Just build your own Atto components. That's the really cool thing about Moodle. And if you looked last year at a presentation from Justin Hunt, he showed exactly how easy it is to go and create your own little plugins. Atto is really simple. So build your own components if there's going to be a lot of work being repeated over and over, and simplify the process. And that's it for me. Hope it was informative and not too boring. Thanks for everybody joining in. Yeah, so my last slide is actually a question slide. There we go. Awesome. Yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to help. Can we enable these styles for teachers and disable them for students? You could, to a degree. As you saw, what I was doing while I was in edit mode, it brought up the red outline so that you could clearly see where the framework is that you'd add your content. But the moment you clicked save and you came to the front screen, those red outlines were gone. So Moodle has a thing called edit sections and mod edit. Those are the two files in your course that you use when you're using the Atto editor. So if you drop a little bit of CSS there, the moment you go into edit sections, that CSS gets called, and that allows you to have custom styles. So quite possibly that could work for you. Yeah, Trish. I had that from some students as well, and like I said, I'm a coder. I get wrapped up, and I think everybody can do it because I can do it. Yeah, exactly that, Ellen. So that's the thing. When we edit the CSS, and I'll just quickly scooch back up, when we make these changes, as we have over here with some text, and the element was done inside the browser, the moment we switch to the code view, that content is there as an inline style, which is cool. So when you've done the editing, quickly flip across, have a look. Yep, it's there. Save it, and your styles are saved with your content. And you could even do this if you were using a label and you were using that label to create a heading. That would work fine as well. Can you tell you more about the price? Price. The price is 100% free. So if you go to Hubble and you register, you get a course, and you can go and create content, back it up, move it to your site. If you need help, I'm happy to help. If you were to say, I want to deploy this onto a dedicated server, normally what I do is I host that server and I charge you for the hosting. But in terms of cost, please use it. And if you need help, shout. Well, if there are no questions, then I shall end the session. Mostly because I'm scared of.
Sorry, Sean, I'll just jump in and say thank you so much. It was funny because you were saying you're concerned with being a coder that wouldn't be interesting. It was very interesting, actually. And
awesome.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Great to go through everything. Guys, if you have any more questions, make sure you get Sean on the forums. Sean, also with the prize and things like that, if you just pop that into your session forum, and then it also means that we'll be able to let other people know who weren't able to make it, because there will be people watching this later. as well in the next 24 hours who are asleep at the moment. Sean, thank you so much. It was fabulous for your first presentation, and we can't wait to see you back again, maybe at the main iMoot next year. Don't get you have any questions, make sure you ask Sean through our forums. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.